morning. This is interesting. You're championing women as part of your foundation because obviously you've had an illustrious career. You're at the top of your game. But it's still very difficult for the majority of women to follow that kind of path, it seems.
Absolutely, and particularly worldwide. When you look at the opportunities for women, they are less than the opportunities for men. And it's for a number of reasons. Firstly, across the world, women don't get the same educational opportunities as men. So that's the first start. They don't get the knowledge. On top of that, women tend to not have the access to the capital, to the networks, to the support networks that they need. And women often lack confidence. Why do they lack confidence? Because society is telling them this is not what women do. And therefore to actually stand up and say, no, this is what I do, and this is why I want to succeed, goes against that culture.
Because it's interesting, we're building up to International Women's Day, and when you look out there at the moment, the role models are there. We've got a female Prime Minister, we've got women heading up the police force, the army, the UK Supreme Court, we've got a female Doctor Who. Then in the papers today, we've got the first ever female pilot of British Airways coming out and saying that across the airline industry, women aren't supported when it comes to maternity allowance and support to help them get back to work. So it's almost that, you have these female role models, but the steps aren't in place yet for other women to get there.
Well, role models are important because, first of all, if you never actually see a successful woman politician, then you're less likely as a young girl to think, that can be me. Once you do see that women can make it to the top, it really does make a difference. But of course, if it's always seen as these women are the exceptions, if it's always seen that these are the women who have had to sacrifice other parts of their lives in order to get there, then you're not really creating a level playing field. So whether it's issues about maternity pay or maternity leave, or whether it's a more general question of whether women are getting a fair chance in the world, it's really important that we see a commitment by everybody to make this happen. And that's why this partnership that my foundation is having with Avon and their Stand For Her campaign is so important, because Avon is a brand which is about cosmetics, obviously, which is something about women use cosmetics to help their confidence. It's a very important part of that. But it's also a brand that reaches over 100 million women a year. So by reaching out to them and helping them in their entrepreneurship journey, by giving them access to training and support, we can really shift the needle.
What was your journey like? Because it's interesting there, you talk about the attitude of all women can't do that. And when you started out in your legal career back in the 70s, I would imagine that was much more prevalent than it is now. What was your journey like? And particularly in the legal profession, do you still see that attitude around?
Well, sadly, I think it's true that though we find many more women going into the legal profession, when I went into the legal profession, it was the first year it had gone above 10%. Now it's, roughly 50-50 going in, but when you look at how women progress through the profession, it's still the case that women are dropping out, and we're still seeing issues, for example, like sexual harassment and bullying within the workplace, and women tend to suffer from that.
It's interesting, isn't it? You obviously had battles to fight in your legal career, but you were also thrust into public life as the wife of the Prime Minister, Tony Blair. And just looking back at some of the coverage of you during your time at Number 10 with your husband, there was this undertone, in fact, quite often it wasn't an undertone, of a sexist attitude towards you in terms of you were a career woman whose husband just happened to be Prime Minister. So, there was newspaper coverage that was almost like the cheek of it, that she has a career while her husband is Prime Minister, or how dare she have views on things, when her husband is Prime Minister. How did you deal with that? Because that can be the attitude sometimes when it comes to women in public life.
Well, for sure. I mean, that's why I call my book Speaking for Myself, because, you say, of course I'm entitled to have views, but when your husband's the Prime Minister, you have to be careful how you express those views, because you're not a representative of the government, and if you want to be a representative of the government, you should stand for election yourself. I mean, complaining about the press is like complaining about the British weather.
But it was just that underlying attitude of she's a career woman, and it's almost like they begrudged you that because you had a family, you had a husband in a very important role.
I always took the view that just because my husband had changed his job and gone into Number 10, that didn't mean that I should give up my career, because I had spent a long time building up my career and had become a QC before my husband became a Prime Minister. Yeah, and there was a kind of assumption when I first went in, from the system itself, from Downing Street itself, that surely I would give up my job. So they were slightly surprised when I said, well, no, I want to continue with my job because it's something that belongs to me.
And since you and your husband left Number 10, I mean, obviously we talk about the role of women. We've touched on the role of women in the legal system, but also in politics as well. And there's been this whole Me Too movement and some very uncomfortable findings within Westminster that a lot of people say haven't been properly addressed. What have you made of the culture that it's sort of been peeled back and seen what's going on underneath? And the public are actually quite disappointed with attitudes in Westminster and the treatment of women.
I don't know, well, I'm sure the public are disappointed, but I'm not sure they're entirely surprised because I think those attitudes towards women, whether it's just about bossy females rather than, you know, confident men, this is an underlying trend in society. What we're talking about is allowing women the opportunity, as 50% of the population, to have equal access to all levels of society and equal chances with men. And the truth is, across the world, there is no country where that actually happens. And in some countries in the world, for example, there are still countries in the world where women can't even work or leave the country without the permission of their male relatives. And, you know, that is not treating women as equal actors with equal dignity to men. So we have to do something about this idea that somehow women are the inferior sex.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we look at government and the political system as setting the tone for these changes. And there's a lot of talk at the moment about the political system being broken. I mean, we've seen this breakaway group of MPs. But a lot of people are saying, you know, government isn't fit for purpose when it comes to tackling gender equality, sexism. If this is, you know, held up as the example of the country, particularly with gender inequality, the treatment of female politicians like Anna Soubry, Diane Abbott, Luciana Burgess, you do wonder if change can be effective if that is the model that people are looking at the moment. People are saying it's broken.
Well, but if you look at the figures again about where are women getting equality, across the World Economic Forum do this report about the global gender gap, and they look at 4 areas, and you see in health and education the gap is narrowing. But if you look at the areas where, if you like, the power is, which is economic activity and political activity, then the gap is much bigger. In economic opportunity, the gap between men and women is like 64 women to 100 men, and for politics, it's in the low 20s. So it's still showing that when you look at where power is situated in the world, women are not getting equal access to that. And if we look at youth today and the importance of ensuring that our youth have the opportunities, Plan International have just done a report where they estimate that there are 628 million young people between 16 and 25 across the world who are not in education and don't have access to employment. And if you look and break down that figure a little more, you discover that the vast majority of those are young girls, young women, who are not getting that first step on the education ladder and then are not being enabled to express themselves, to find themselves, to go on a journey to be able to support themselves. And that's why entrepreneurship is one of the keys to this, because if we can help more women entrepreneurs come into the economy so that they can devise their businesses that suit themselves, that can suit the way they work, so that they can combine their work with their family obligations, then we will not only increase the world gross domestic product, which is a good thing in itself, but even more importantly, will enable women to take their rightful place in society so that they are respected, that their voices are heard, and they can stand up to things like bullying, sexual violence, or just the complete neglect of women's issues.